attack of the Twin Towers in New York. Before we thought it was a terrorism crisis in the US, but as a legislative response, a political response began, we found ourselves in Africa having to deal with the question of terrorism, including in places where terrorism was not going to be an experience. I recall in 2007 or 2008, thereabout, Swaziland passing an anti-terrorist legislation. And I was asking my friends in Swaziland, who would want to attack Swaziland to the extent they mount a terrorism act as a legal framework to respond to global terrorism? No sooner than the ink had dried on the law being passed was that law being used to target civil society groups. So I'm raising this because a number of the narratives with respect to coronavirus impact have been around numbers. So we know, for example, that the globe is now dealing with 69 million people or cases of COVID-19, just globally. And if you break it down region by region, you will see that Europe probably sitting around 18 million, and in Africa just above 1 million. And so we are talking about Africa's resilience. We're talking about shaming those who have predicted that Africa would have 50 million deaths and things like that. But I think that's a misplaced celebration, because again, like other crises before the COVID-19 crisis, Africa is having to deal with the secondary impacts of the coronavirus impact on our productive sectors, on our economy, on our governance system, and it's unleashing a vortex of responses, including demonic responses we had never seen on the continent as a result of COVID-19. So I think celebrating it with a sense of low numbers does not add any value to us. Rather, we should be looking at this moment as an opportunity for reflection. And I know that the theme is recover better, stand up for human rights. We should use this theme to really examine whether Africa today is fit for purpose to deal with pandemics of this nature, whether Africa has systems that we can rely on and trust, whether our allocation of resources reflects aspirations and priorities of ordinary people, whether Africa's readiness to invest in diagnostics, in vaccines, in ventilators, and therapeutics clearly tell us something about how our economic systems are structured. Whether this is an opportunity for Africa to really question whom or from whom we listen when we decide on economic policy making. So for me, let's stop celebrating the low numbers of infections. Let's rather invest our time in looking at how disruptive and dislocating COVID-19 has been to our economies. From the onset, I argue that COVID-19 has exposed with brutal clarity the brokenness of our socio-economic and political systems. It has also exposed the values that underpin our global economic and political system. It has driven many on the very edge of their capacity to survive and has tested our collective resilience. But it also has sparked the imaginations for a radically different future, a more just future, a more equitable future, and a future of possibility in which human rights can be at the center of human development. You know, moments like this should be moments of possibility. And I think that's, if we are talking about building better or recovering better, we should be looking more at moments of this and look at what are the possibilities. They can be dangerous possibilities. They can be around the scramble for control, not just of resources like vaccines, but also of narrative, offering the power to set the course of events. There are people out there who are trying to tell us how the world should now live and proceed. So moments like this should really invite us to challenge and review what is at the root and structure of the problems we face in Southern Africa, the triple burden of unemployment, poverty, and inequality. I think that if we are to examine the impact for Southern African countries, we have to start by saying that this impact is only an amplification of what was in existence before. COVID-19 simply amplified the fragility, the fault lines, and the weaknesses of our Southern African economies, our political systems, and our leadership. We saw from the onset a copy and paste approach that was taken by many of our leaders. We took a public health response. So the public health response was simply excited with lockdowns, because that's what Wuhan had told us, that's what Europe had told us, that's what parts of Asia had told us. So the public health response was the first line that Southern governments took. And that public health response was about containing, tracing, isolating, and possibly treating. But what it did was to forget that once you lock down and put quarantine regimes, you need accompanying measures to ensure that the lockdown is successful, such as social protection. But much less was invested in social protection and other accompanying measures. A militant approach arrived. So between March 13 to March 31, in Southern Africa, we had experienced 6 state of emergency declarations as legal framework, 6 state of disaster declarations, and 2 pronouncements around curfews and a mixed bag of restrictions, as we saw in Zambia and Seychelles. And that was so super fast. And it was almost like one was looking for the other brother to see what they have done, and they would do that. So we locked the region. And we locked the region without thinking very much about impact, because everything was the hyperbole of numbers that needed to be stopped. So there are 4 things that we need to look at looking back over the last 10 months. The first was the first impact on health, on livelihoods, and essentially on the socio-economic rights cluster that we care about. We saw immediately, because Southern Africa, like most of Africa, has this economic model that Malawian development economist Guy Moane described as economic dualism and enclavity. We do have 25% of labor force absorbed by the formal sector, and the rest of the labor force that exists in our region is in the informal economy and the communal economy. So the lockdown measures, which should normally apply to a formal sector where people can work from an office, socially distanced, and have a place they call workplace, cannot be deployed on an informal and communal economy organized very differently with entry levels that are very different. So the attack on the economic system is what really frightened most of our countries. We locked down cross-border traders. By so doing, locking down 17 billion possible income for households and families that this trade usually generate. We locked down agricultural activities. We locked down things we had not declared as essential services, including health reproductive rights for women. So the visit for antenatal care services was disrupted. The visit for postnatal care services was disrupted. And we suddenly saw a lockdown regime that was taking a huge toll on gender-based violence. The number of reported cases of gender-based violence in almost every country rose up in the first 2 months of the lockdowns, because we're locking down women and their abusers, forcing them to experience what I call double jeopardy, an economic crisis and a violence crisis. And that was an experience that you can almost tell in almost every country. So a combination of economic impact in cutting livelihoods off as a result of a strategy that was copying and pasting what people had learned from elsewhere. We saw the absence of social protection mechanisms in Namibia, where a campaign since 2002 had been going on about a basic income grant, which would be paid to all Namibians in order to deal with the problem of inequality, came back to bite the government for the rejection that they did in 2003, 2004, because they then had to pay a once-off grant of 700 rands or something like that to every Namibian for a once-off payment in order to combat the excessive impact that was now taking its toll on the poor of Namibia. In Botswana, we saw some income being generated and spread to families that were targeted. In South Africa, there was a much more aggressive social protection regime that we saw with funding coming in. And in places like Zimbabwe, I think it was more declaration by the Minister of Finance, but we didn't see quite the evidence of social protection being rolled out in countries. In Mozambique, I think there was no agenda. We'll hear from my brother when he speaks on Mozambique. So what we saw was the inability of governments to cope with the impact of lockdowns because there is no social policy that is aggressive. Social policy went through the window during the time of structural adjustment program. We also see the inability to mobilize technology to be able to provide education because the inequality that we experience from country to country with online learning became such a huge drain on the ability of our kids to access education in the last 10 months. So COVID-19 amplified pre-existing inequalities, and it also exposed the limits, or rather lack of investment that had gone into health, into education, into technology, into housing, into water delivery. In South Africa, there was a huge problem of water at a time when we were calling for people to wash their hands. The water was simply unavailable to be able to wash those hands. So we have a COVID-19 pandemic which ceases to become a health crisis. It becomes an economic crisis in the sense that much more of the economic questions of the day are revealed to us. And we know that if you look at the situation of our region just through housing, the division of colonial boundaries of housing, which gives us a sense of inequality in Angola, in Malawi, in Zimbabwe, in South Africa, simply played out in a larger stage for us to see the real difficulties that we experience. So that's the first big problem, the attack on socio-economic rights, the absence of social protection, and the sheer absence of leadership about what to do, because macroeconomic policy was always engineered from the right. It was never developmental in outlook. And in the presence of a debt pandemic by many of our countries in Southern Africa, the space, the fiscal space to reallocate resources towards public health was not there because many of our countries are servicing debts. Zambia actually defaulted for the first time its debt obligations during this time. And we can see from Cape to Cairo that it's actually a big problem, that 25 of our countries in Africa have now exceeded the standard set by the Africa Monetary Program for debt to GDP ratio, which should sit below 50%. Many of our countries are now sitting at 70% debt to GDP ratio. And that means for every dollar they have, 70 cents has to go somewhere else to pay for debt, and most of it is servicing interest. That problem is requiring of us to imagine what recovery means in the context of such a huge attack on socio-economic rights. Second, major impact was on what we call state overreach, which is, I think COVID-19 offered a huge political life jacket for a number of governments who had always wanted to unleash an authoritarian project. So COVID-19 was a stage for a new momentum on authoritarian resurgence. And we saw this through a reckless deployment with the speed of an unidentified flying object of a series of repressive laws and regulations that were passed in the name of providing lockdown regime, but fundamentally about obtaining authoritarian objectives. So regulations around fake news or sharing information that is inaccurate became excessively applied on journalists. So that in Zimbabwe, we saw that in Swaziland, we saw that in Tanzania, where newspapers in Tanzania were closed. Mwanachi Online TV newspaper were closed just purely on account of being accused of passing or spreading false news. And this was, of course, the government wanted to have one narrative. So you saw that is the first problem. The second was a targeting of civil society leaders and human rights defenders responding to the impact of COVID-19. We saw that in Mozambique, we saw that in Zimbabwe, we saw that in Tanzania. That arresting of human rights defenders has become commonplace and the allegation is that you have violated COVID-19 regulations. But if you look at country to country, there is not many instances where people from ruling parties or government-aligned offices or institutions were ever arrested for violating COVID-19 regulations, even as you could see with your naked eye. So state overreach has offered an opportunity for authoritarian resurgence and for countries to use COVID-19 not to fight public health issues, but to actually just punish political opponents, close civic space, and ensure that you can progress with your authoritarian project. Elections were postponed in some countries, up north in Ethiopia, and in Uganda, elections are taking place right now in the context of deploying selectively these COVID-19 regulations. So to recover better, what do you do to an attitude of governance which sees crisis moments as an opportunity for consolidating repression rather than for opening up the space so that you benefit from maximum ideas that could come from anywhere else? That is a big concern for Southern Africa. An emergence of surveillance became also a manifestation of the state overreach. Surveillance offline, surveillance online, with a number of activists reporting to us, certainly at Amnesty, them being followed, being bullied, social media accounts being hacked, so that the message could be sent to activists that this is no time to criticize governments. This is the time to praise dear leaders for the work that they are doing in locking down country to deal with the COVID-19. So state overreach around affecting rights, deploying legislation that violated international law, that was not proportionate, that were not even accountable, was a burning concern, and I think we continue to see that. Add this in some of our countries where courts being used essentially as sites of delivering injustice, courts being used as sites to deliver political persecution in the name of prosecution. So not many convictions have actually come out of human rights defenders arrested during COVID-19. So it's arrest in order to persecute, so that you simply remove the manifestation of any kind of political competition. So to recover better, we need again to retain the state to a developmental role, remove it from the overreach and abuse of power that we are seeing in Southern Africa. The third impact that we have seen is the one around international cooperation and assistance. There is a growing nationalism around the world where COVID-19 has brought countries to look more inwardly rather than outwardly. We have seen sites of xenophobic attacks, xenophobic attitudes that seeks to blame the other as the reason for driving the conditions we have. We know that companies have closed down, unemployment has gone up. And I think governments need to speak honestly to their citizens when they start blaming nationals from other countries as the reason behind their suffering. This internal, inward-looking nationalism is also manifested at the global level, where if you look at the level of stimulus packages that we have seen in the global north, we are talking about 10 trillion euros has been spent on stimulus packages in the global north in European countries. Germany deployed 2 trillion euros just to deal with stimulus packages. The US is talking about giving $300 per week for the next 6 months to every American citizen who is affected by COVID-19. The UK the same. And when you look at what's coming to the global south in terms of overseas development assistance, we are sitting at 250 billion US dollars. So the disparity in resources spent on dealing with the coronavirus up north and down here reflects the global inequalities in the system that we really need to be championing, fighting against. Because if we don't do that, then it simply means the recovery we're talking about is a recovery that is fragile and weak for countries of the global south and robust and inclusive for countries in the global north. So international cooperation and assistance is with us. At the same time, if we do not provide debt relief mechanisms in order to support acquisition of vaccines, then we might be dealing with countries that are simply not going to be able to recover. the affordability of the vaccines that are being found from Pfizer and others, the accessibility of these vaccines and the safety of these vaccines and the treatment regime that is accompanying them are matters of international cooperation. So for crisis, for Oxfam and others, it is important that we come together to look at what are those themes in international cooperation that might affect our recovery, so that we have extraterritorial responsibility mobilized to get resources to augment leadership and ensure that whatever comes out is for the common good of people. There is an example, for example, pushed by Costa Rica in Latin America, where it has been advocating for the pulling together of all COVID-related technologies into one basket so that countries can easily access the technology and use it for the treatment and for the recovery of their own countries. There are countries that are advocating for the removal of intellectual property rights barriers that stand in the way of responding to and recovering from COVID-19. If Southern African countries and civil society are not involved in these debates, then we will once again celebrate our low numbers. But the broader economic impact which is coming with the second wave will have global leadership. But we have also seen this like China, which is not providing any inspirational leadership to fill the vacuum that has been left by the US retreating into an America first mantra. And then the emerging economies in BRICS have simply disappointed. They have not offered an alternative. So in a way, citizens are their own. So from below, to build better, back better, we need to mobilize a new vision from below, a vision that is equal to the scale of the opportunity that we see, a vision that will speak collectively to questions of hunger, to questions of deprivation, and to questions of a more just and equitable world, a region which has a sustainable relationship with our planet, a vision that is seeing technology as a driver of inclusion rather than a manifestation of inequality, and a vision that actually puts a renewal of human development and commitment to human development above the market fundamentalism that promotes structural injustice. So we need this new vision. And each of us in our countries have to be challenging our countries and our governments to lead better, to develop this new vision better. We also need a social and economic system which is built on the foundation of equality. We can't continue to recover better if we are endlessly demanding and pursuing this idea of economic growth as the most ruthlessly important thing in our planet. Because we have seen over the last 10 to 20 years that economic growth, which does not prioritize human development, leads to what we have seen in many countries as jobless growth, where the economy is growing, but jobs are not being created, or the so-called ruthless growth, where it's driven by extractive industries. What we see, the endless pursuit of natural resources in Mozambique, Zambia, South Africa, Lesotho. You pursue economic growth at the expense of building an inclusive society. Or you build economic growth which is voiceless, where you suppress voices of democracy in order for you to say, no, what you need is poverty, look at China. Or a futureless growth, where we are spending resources needed for future generations to satisfy the consumption of today's elites. So it's important that we build a new vision in which growth equals human development. The state has to be responsible for directing the process of growth into human development. And we are not seeing that in Southern Africa. That's the most important building block for global level. That's why we must act locally, but we must also think globally. Because what we do here has global significance. What happens in the globe has national impact. So it's important that we are part of global networks of solidarity around rethinking the economy, rethinking politics, rethinking governance. We can't just flatten the infection curve. Organizations like Oxfam Oxfam can play a vital role in this rethinking. This is the place where organizations like Crisis Coalition, with its focus on governance, can play a very, very important rethinking role, because gone are the days when we see human rights in terms of political rights, civil rights, as existing in one corner, socio-economic rights as existing in another corner. These rights and entitlements are connecting themselves on their own. If we do not connect the dots ourselves, we risk being irrelevant at a time when civil society is needed much better than before to build a more inclusive and durable system of governance, a more inclusive and durable system of economy, and much more important system of care. It is important for me to end here on this idea of building a future narrative and building an inclusive growth as part of a vision to respond to what we have seen in the last 10 months. The battle certainly is not over. The vaccine is here, but I can tell you that if we are not careful about how it is administered, the future of work could be affected by whether you are vaccinated or not. Freedom of movement could be affected by whether you are vaccinated or not. It can sit as a pre-existing condition that you have had coronavirus before in your body, and that you might be unable to get insurance support and other forms of social protections. So to ensure that rights are at the center of recovery means that you are vaccinating yourself from existing and future inequalities that could be built in the system of economic management of how the vaccination program goes. It is important that we see ourselves as all of us as human rights defenders, not just those who are on the front line, not those who are demonstrating in Malawi to oppose what President Mutharika was doing, not Hopewell Chimono in Zimbabwe who is talking against corruption, and not Laura Miti in Zambia who is challenging budget transparency to be open, and not the dearly departed Fikile Changase who was gunned down on the 22nd of October here in South Africa because she was opposing the mining of coal in a community, and not Fatima Mbirime in Mozambique who is talking about budget transparency and attracting attacks to her from regimes and supporters of the regime that would not want open, transparent governance to be the template on which we build our future. So with this, let me stop there, Linga, and give it back to you. Thank you very much for listening.
Wow, thank you so much, Deprose. I didn't expect anything less than that. You have really challenged us in terms of the global, you've challenged us in terms of our local context, and I think you've covered quite a range of issues. I will not attempt to summarize. Of course, I know that we have three eminent discussants that are really going to take on issues that you have raised, react to the issues that you have raised, and I think it's best that we leave it at that and we go to the discussants. Now, I just seek your indulgence because we started late in waiting for a good number of us to get online. I want to ask if the and Development Policy in Mozambique. He's led the Center for Public Integrity, a reputable anti-corruption civil society organization in Mozambique, and currently he's also teaching political science and governance at Eduardo Mondlane University in Maputo, Mozambique. Our next discussant is Charles Kaduweka. Charles is a human rights activist and founder and executive director of Youth and Society, a household name in Malawi. He's a global youth ambassador for SDG 16, and in 2017, no doubt that Charles was named Malawi's 2017 Nyasa Times Personality of the Year for his prominent role in human rights campaign, particularly his anti-corruption drive. Charles has more than 10 years experience in human rights advocacy, providing leadership in project management and resource mobilization. Our third discussant is Colette, and Colette, I don't know how I pronounce your surname, Latlojane. Colette is the Executive Director of Human Rights Institute of Southern Africa. She has over 20 years experience in the field of human rights, and she has monitored the enforcement of regional and international human rights frameworks at domestic and regional level, and also served as a focal point for drafting and submitting NGO shadow reports to the UN and AU. Colette serves on a number of continental organizations, including the African Commission Study Group on Freedom of Association and Assembly, the Pan-Africa Human Rights Defenders Network, and the Coalition for an Effective Africa Court on Human Rights and People's Rights. Please. So over to you, Prof. Your 5 minutes start now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much, Deprose, for the brilliant presentation that I will be reacting to it, given the context of Mozambique. My first point is that even before COVID-19, Mozambique was already facing a democratic closure. And you know the country that is known for sham elections. But the 2019 general elections set a clear path of democratic closure. You will recall the killing of human rights activist Anastasia Matavel in the daylight by the State Defense Force in the Gaza province. That was a clear point of departure in terms of democratic closure in the country. But before this, you will also recall that Mozambique had the so-called $2 billion illegal scandal that was unveiled in 2016, which resulted in severe socio-economic problems as the development partners had immediately cut aid. So the state was in a clear bankruptcy, therefore unable to invest in key social sectors such as social protection, healthy sector, and education. So government was already not spending in those areas even before COVID-19. But what I have said was exacerbated by the situation in the northern Mozambique, the insurgency in northern Mozambique, which is militarizing the civic space and is giving military instruments for the police to act, resulting in gross violations and abuse of human rights with frivolous attacks against human rights defenders. In addition to this, democracy and human rights are affected by the junta militar in the central part of the country, which is led by Nyang'wa, who is a dissident from the peace process that was already ongoing for almost 30 years now. So these two situations, the insurgency in the north and the junta militar in the central part of Mozambique, has resulted, as I've said, in the militarization of the police and governance institutions. An example, 3 weeks ago, our president, Mr. Nyusi, he told the military institution to heavily respond against mainstream media and social media if they felt that they were being criticized. I mean, this is a clear attack on the freedoms and liberties here in Mozambique. And this is a consequence of what I've said, militarization of the police and governance institutions. So this is the context before COVID. When COVID-19 erupted, government quickly issued a state of emergency. Without intelligence, there was no scientific evidence of the need for such a state of emergency. This was renewed for 3 times, and the police, which was already militarized, had heavy response, beating up people without masks, beating up people who were going out looking for food, to the point of killing 6 people, 3 in the northern part, 2 in the central part, and 1 in the southern part of Mozambique. Formal and informal economy was shut down and no social protection. And government went to the IMF to borrow money. with the money from the IMF. This was huge amount of money, $309 million to the government of President Nyusi. They immediately started what we call an elitist approach to preventing the spread of COVID-19. We have expected and we have engaged the government to find ways of engaging people and giving something for the people. But they have decided to focus on infrastructure, rehabilitation for classrooms, healthy facility, social protection, and preventing economic collapse via credit to MSCs. But what in reality we have seen is fraudulent procurements to tenderpreneurs. So all the money was given to tenderpreneurs, no social protection, and the so-called credit to prevent the collapse of the economy was given to the SMEs that are owned or close to the government people. So in reality is the informal sector, which is the basis for the livelihoods of the majority of the population, it remains closed for almost 10 months now. No support is given to people. And corruption has taken away the resources necessary to support the people. So COVID-19 has affected the socio-economic rights of the people in two ways. One, the corruption that has taken away the necessary needs. But secondly, the bad governance response in terms of keeping the informal sector closed while pursuing an elitist approach which has given all the resources coming from the IMF to the very same people that have been entertaining the path or trends of neglecting investment in the key sectors that would benefit the majority of the population. So as I've said, the insurgents and junta militar give more room for violation of human rights, the closing of the civic space and targeting of human rights defenders. While COVID-19 has given room for violations of socioeconomic rights of the population, with the government failure to address the key needs and the closure of the informal sector, while, as I've said, pursuing the elitist approach to the response to the COVID. And here we have to underline, in line with the theme of our discussion today, all resources that government is misusing is using to pursue the elitist approach. They come in a form of debt. So the very same debt that is piling up, which is now 100% above the ratio of GDP, it is a burden for the poor, and importantly, it will affect the possibility of economic recovery post-COVID-19, affecting not the rich, not the government people, but the poor people. So it has exacerbated the inequality and the gap between the haves and do not have. So COVID has continued the path of elitist socio-economic spending, neglecting those who are the most in need, who are the majority of the population. I would stop here for time being. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Professor. Really reminding us that even before COVID-19, the state was already bankrupt. We already were dealing with a situation near ground zero. And COVID-19 has just really brought in more things that are exacerbating the situation. The corruption, the overborrowing, that the citizens who have to pay through their hard-earned money, all these are issues that you have raised. And I think it's right that we engage in these issues. I'm monitoring the chat box there. I recognize that people are asking, but can't we say our borders are able to build resistance alone? See how we are recording the increased recoveries. I wonder who can take that. Nellie is raising an issue. The vaccine challenge is a big one. I hope we can strategize on that. And there's an interesting discussion that Theoda has also indicated. Deprose, that was a very insightful presentation, but help us. How can we balance our advocacy asks in terms of timely exercising our democratic norms and ask, and then on the other hand, the need for advocacy asks to protect the citizens. Let's monitor the chat box. Let's paste more questions and comments there. This is a very interesting discussion. How can we build back better and in a more equitable situation? I now wish to turn to Charles.
Thank you so much, Linga. Anything new here, but just to portray some of the key issues that my colleagues have raised, and maybe trying to be more specific in the context of Malawi. Let me begin by agreeing with my colleagues that COVID-19 has really posed a huge threat to democracy. In real sense, in Malawi, democracy came under heavy test, particularly when you look at the 2019 and the 2020 presidential elections, which has been referred to, I think, a number of times. But just to mention that within the context of democracy, what we saw largely was the loss of public confidence in government. And the question that we should be dealing with is in the post-COVID-19 or in the recovery period, how do we begin to rebuild public trust in government? When people know that their governments cannot be trusted, their governments are corrupt, their leaders do not live by the rule of law, their leaders can take advantage of the pandemic to their self-aggrandizement, their leaders can take advantage of the COVID-19 to enrich themselves. Now, we need to deal with the restoration of public confidence in democracy. Otherwise, democracy has come under attack, has come under threat. You would recall in Malawi, for example, that the then ruling party had used COVID-19 as an excuse for not holding the presidential flash elections following the nullification of the elections 2019 by the Constitutional Court. You would recall again that they went further to even impose COVID-19 restrictions in the name of lockdown and declared a state of disaster in a bid to frustrate the elections. We thank the courts for really coming in to protect and defend our democracy. So indeed, democracy came under attack, not only in Malawi, in a number of countries where COVID-19 was used to frustrate the democratic freedoms and rights, and particularly looking at the credibility of elections or the mere holding of elections. You would recall there was a debate as of whether we needed to have elections amidst COVID-19. But at the end of the day in Malawi, there was one conclusion, that the political crisis we were going through was much more dangerous and more lethal than the pandemic itself. So that was the conclusion of the people, and we needed to move ahead with elections. That only tells you the level of confidence in our governments, that people don't trust our governments and that are willing to take more risk, taking out irresponsible governments and deal with COVID-19 later. And we saw that in Malawi. The second thing I would like to comment on is to do with the attack on the civil and political rights that has already been also cited. In Malawi, we had specific cases of attacks against human rights defenders. You would recall that we had 10 months relentless protests in Malawi challenging the fraudulent elections that were later on nullified by the courts. So the COVID-19 was used as a justification really to launch an attack on human rights defenders, particularly to launch a venom on the frontline human rights defenders that were calling for justice on elections. And we saw, for example, where the state had introduced a 2 billion upfront payment condition for anyone who was planning demonstrations. Desperate means of really frustrating and attacking the civic space, frustrating those that were demanding justice and political accountability in the country. We saw the arrest of human rights defenders, particularly the leadership of the Human Rights Defenders Coalition that was providing the leadership in fighting against those fraudulent elections. So different tactics were used in really attacking human rights defenders and the civic space overall. The militarization of COVID-19 response was quite evident. And also, one other important aspect that we must also be looking at as we're looking at even the recovery process would be to look at how do we deal with the gaps in the legal framework that COVID-19 has exposed. So, for example, in Malawi, the courts had made it very clear that the government did not have any, legal framework to justify the imposition of lockdown because it was not provided for in the legislation, neither in any response of the pandemic. Therefore, the decisions that were taken by the state were really regarded ultra vires and that were not really in tandem with the constitutional provisions. Therefore, our own legal framework was challenged, and I think these are the areas that we may need to begin reflecting on as we look at the recovery. Do we have adequate legislation that can respond to the pandemics when they come, so that we also avoid creating room for authoritarian leaders to use that gap as a way of consolidating their power and abusing those powers. So we may need to really deal with that one. The big question that I have was when we are reflecting on the legal framework and the lapses that have been exposed by COVID-19 is that how do we take back the powers that have already been taken up by the states unlawfully and without following the procedures of coming up with the laws? Now they're enjoying that authority, those mandates. How do we get those powers back? Because those powers were usurped unlawfully, and how do we get those powers back to the people so that this authoritarianism is really avoided? How do we go back to these states that have been using these powers illegally or unlawfully in the name of COVID-19? Do we leave these powers to them, or do we begin to challenge these powers that have been exercising in the name of COVID? We have seen, for example, like in Malawi, where the COVID-19 regulations were declared unconstitutional because they did not really follow the due process of the law in terms of developing them. And definitely, Malawi government had imposed a state of emergency in the name of COVID-19, which was inconsistent with the constitution, and that the state has been exercising different roles in the name of COVID-19 regulations. How do we get those powers back and ensure that we have relevant legislation and ensure that there's a rule of law in the management and the response to COVID-19 or any other pandemics that might be before us? Let me also mention a little bit about the social crisis that has been created, and that we may need to strongly respond to that. In Malawi, for example, we have a surge of teenage pregnancies, child marriages are really on the rise. We talk about really the shift in terms of focus on governments only talking about COVID at the expense of other, public health issues in terms of investment. These are issues that we need to respond to in terms of the recovery. Let me conclude by talking about the role of the state institutions in the recovery process. We have seen in Malawi, state institutions being very progressive. We have looked at the judiciary in terms of upholding the rule of law and indeed protecting the constitution and particularly the freedoms of association, freedoms of assembly, freedom of expression, at a point when these freedoms came under massive attack by the ruling party. And I think that we need to also strongly engage and collaborate with the state institutions. We have seen in Malawi how these state institutions, such as the judiciary, the anti-corruption authority, the ombudsman, the human rights commissions, can be really strategic, and they provide the protective role, standing up in defense of the rule of law. We have also seen the army in Malawi upholding the rule of law. How do we collaborate with these institutions as civil society, not just during the pandemic, but in our engagements in protection and promotion of human rights? Let me stop there for now, Linga, just to give a picture of what has been the context in Malawi and citing specific examples. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charles. It's always a pleasure to hear from you, raising key issues around the choices that Malawi made. Actually, a realization that we couldn't be governed the way we were governed in the previous era, and that there needed to be a change in the way that we are governed so that we can best handle COVID-19. I recognize that point that you're raising around the political crisis that needed resolution, that pushes citizens to making sure that we have the fresh presidential elections. You are also stating an important aspect that you just exposed the gaps that are in the law. How do we make sure that we pick up on that momentum so that we are able to have law reform that addresses these structural issues? You raise an important point. How can we get back the powers as citizens? I think that's an important aspect that we need to discuss. And you very well put a spotlight on the issues that state institutions were actually tested, and there were others that lived beyond that testing. You mentioned about the judiciary, you mentioned about some of the oversight institutions, and how do we ensure that we can strategically collaborate with them, knowing that they stood with the citizens in time of need. So thank you so much, Charles, for that prompter. And again, the chat box, please make your comments and questions. At this point, I wish to invite Colette, our last discussant, to make her interventions, and hoping that she can take 5 minutes. And I'm also seeking your indulgence if we can spill over beyond the 12:30 mark. At least if you can give us some more 10 minutes so that after Colette, we can have a Q&A discussion, and after which we could close the webinar. So Colette, please, over to you. Let's hear from you for 5 minutes, and we'll open it up for Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Moderator. I'll also wish to congratulate the organizers of this event. Really wish them well in coming up with such a profound focus of today's commemoration of International Human Rights Day. I am Colette Latlojane. I'm with the Human Rights Institution of South Africa, and I am really honored and privileged to be part of this very important conversation. For us from South Africa, I must say that we are commemorating the signing of the Constitution into law by the first Black democratic president, Dr. Nelson Mandela, and we are also commemorating the first Black Chief Justice who was appointed as a constitutional judge, late Justice Ismail Mahomed. And then we are also commemorating the 25th anniversary of the South African Human Rights Institution, mandated to play oversight mechanism, to be responsible to ensure that all rights in the Bill of Rights are respected, are fulfilled, are promoted and protected by the state. We are here gathering at the Constitutional Hill to evaluate how civil society, the experience of civil society in the realizations of human rights. Nelson Mandela signed this Constitution of South Africa in a place called Sharpeville. It's in Vereeniging. The purpose of signing this constitution at Vereeniging, Sharpeville, it was to symbolize, the painful history of the struggle for human rights in South Africa, and also not only, receiving support internally, but international support that South Africa received from Southern Africa. We were also torn apart by the evil acts of apartheid. They were affecting the whole Southern Africa. When South Africa was finally, independent and, rescued from a very injustice policies of apartheid that were declared as a crime against humanity, we felt that there was going to be freedom, particularly in Southern Africa, that there will be, because at the beginning, the region wanted to lessen dependence on South Africa in terms of trade, in terms of development, in terms of many programs that we were depending on within Southern Africa. Now South Africa has got this progressive constitution that was, as I've mentioned, signed in Sharpeville. Sharpeville turned 60 years. We did not celebrate the 60th anniversary. Actually, the people in Sharpeville are still struggling for basic fundamental rights like service delivery, sanitation, electricity, housing. There is no proper infrastructure to really to take what Nelson Mandela synonymized by going into that area where the massacres and violations of human rights shocked the whole world, and where reconciliation and peace was professed in that undertaking of signing the constitution in Sharpeville. We have seen that the 25th years of the excuse me, we have seen that inside the 25th anniversary of the signing of the constitution into law, we've got 9 years that are described as wasteful years. These are the years where the government, decided to deviate from the guidance of the Constitution. Our Constitution provides the Bill of Rights, oversight mechanisms. It was also, incorporated international principles where a court, tribunal, or a forum is empowered, to give interpretation into international law. So it is a very progressive constitution that the world is really praising it, and we also are proud of having such a document. However, it cannot just be a document that is praised, that is, amazing in its strong provisions, without, delivering what is expected, without acting on behalf of the citizens. Inside the Constitution, that's Section 41. Section 41 provides that the state has got a duty to care for the welfare of the citizens, to protect the citizens, to be loyal to the citizens, and also to ensure that they defend the country, the republic, and everyone within the borders of South Africa. We have seen that during that era of madness, where corruption was cultivated to the extent that it became a culture from institution level, from local government, provincial and national level. We have seen how corruption was highlighted in the Auditor General's report, who repeatedly highlighted that there is fruitless expenditure. There's unauthorized expenditure. We have lost billions and billions. State institutions, what are they called? They are called state-owned enterprises. They are bankrupt. Resources that are meant to develop citizens, for example, those who cannot afford, under Section 27 of the Constitution, the government has got a duty to assist, to provide basic fundamental rights to those citizens, and also to address the economic and social imbalances of apartheid. So we are nowhere near to that. Progress that was made before the 9 years have actually taken us back to the situation where we're still negotiating, we're trying to get out of apartheid. The civil society was once referred as foreign agent for regime change. The very same processes of gatherings, of protests, of demonstration, which the apartheid regime forbid. They are protected in our constitution. We have seen law enforcement targeting civil society, human rights defenders. The shrinking space is a reality of South Africa as well. The environment to raise issues openly without fear, without any doubt. For example, talk about corruption, raising, calling the constitution to hold the perpetrators of violations of human rights. It is no longer a safe thing. We have seen extrajudicial killings. We have seen forced disappearances. We have people that have disappeared. We don't know their whereabouts. There's little progress in investigating. We have seen laws like promotion of equal protection against discrimination. This is a law that South Africa should have championed in supporting the South African Human Rights Commission in setting up a committee that is addressing or engaging with government regarding the racism that we have seen happening in Senegal, in a province in Free State, and also in Western Cape by the EFF. We have channels, we have mechanisms that the government has delayed. We are advocating for reprisals to end in South Africa, to allow citizens to speak against corruption. That has even been aggravated by the situation of COVID-19. The government is now really affected by providing resources and helping people that are affected by COVID-19, and also with laws that were reminiscent to apartheid era, where citizens cannot protest, and the gender-based violence that has affected women and girls to the extent that South Africa is no longer a safe country for women and girls. The disproportionate of gender violence has raised alarm, and it is also a significant year for South Africa, where we are chairing the AU as a regional body, and also we are playing an important role at the UN. We are on the UN Security Council. Where is peace and security for women, for the region? We have situations in Mozambique. We have situations in DRC. I understand under the SADC, there was a meeting held by the leaders in Botswana. They will only address the terrorism, attacks that are taking place in Cabo Delgado in Mozambique, only in March. What is going to happen during all these years? This has happened for three years. 2017, the terrorism in Mozambique has been reported, calling for leaders to do something. They are also an important body on the organ on politics, peace and security of the Southern Africa. We are not seeing, appetite for working together. However, when it comes to law enforcement attacking peaceful protesters, attacking even women who are protesting against gender-based violence, they are completely, acting, with vigor and using arms, live ammunition to wipe out innocent citizens, when the AU has declared 2020 as the year of silencing the gun. So we are calling for all members in Southern Africa, we are calling the SADC member state to ensure that citizens are protected. We have SADC Declaration Treaty that has highlighted the significant role of civil society. Regional integration can only happen with the role of civil society. That has been listed inside the SADC Declaration. The SADC has got no tribunal. Citizens have been advocating for a tribunal that will hold member states accountable. Right now in COVID-19, there are violations of human rights without a tribunal to address the violations that are happening in the country. We are finding it very, very, very difficult to see, accountability, the rule of law respected within the SADC. The elections that are usually being manipulated, like in Tanzania and also in other countries, like we have seen what is happening in Namibia. We want to have credible elections. We want SADC gender protocol and development to be implemented by all member states within Southern Africa. We want policy that we have for health, that member states contribute their 15% of their budget. That, you know, when crisis such as COVID-19 comes, we don't run around and we don't behave the way we've been behaving. And instead of applying solidarity principles we have that are, you know, incorporated in the AU provisions, we see member states using force, using violence against their citizens. We need, as we go for recovery, we want reprisals that are, you know, happening across board to end, defenders of human rights to be respected and to be supported with resources, because we are promoting and protecting the constitutional provisions. We are promoting and protecting the treaties that member states have ratified, that the laws in our countries must give effect to what state parties have committed. We want the judiciary to remain independent. We want mechanisms that we have as the AU, the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, to be respected. We are calling member states to really change, come up with a new norm of working with the citizens, because now we're going to have a free trade. With this free trade that they are clapping hands, how is this going to be implemented? Are people going to be trafficked, drug trafficking, and all the challenges that are facing women? We will want this free trade for all the SERAC member states to begin, you know, getting enrichment and creating jobs for the young people that are being used for all sorts of drugs and all sorts of terrible crimes that we face in our region. I would like to end here because I can see that I can carry on without being stopped. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Colette. Thank you so much. I like the passion with which you bring out these issues. So yes, being able to highlight that you're coming from a very strong background and legacy. The Constitution of South Africa is claimed as one of the most progressive, but it can't just remain on paper. There's got to be a way of making sure that it translates itself into tangible action. Again, it's the same, you know, same script, different cast. We have seen Colette raise issues around corruption, which have been raised by almost everyone. The shrinking space, how the COVID-19 situation has further infringed on the rights of women, given the rising cases of gender-based violence, and there has to be a new way of working with the citizens. Thank you so much, Colette, for that prompter in view of what Deprose presented. Just checking with. So thanks, Charles, for the insight on the Malawi context, but how can we enforce the judiciary system in Malawi, as during these times of COVID-19, we have a lot of unfinished gender-based violence cases in the courts. Muchena, that's one of the districts in Malawi. Pato is highlighting how to ensure that the judiciary system is still functional to respond to issues of the pandemic. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your patience. We've now come to the point where you are free to raise your hand to ask a question, and the keynote speaker is still here. The three distinguished discussants are still here, and there are some of the questions that we already put in the chat box. If we can just take some 8 minutes to interact and hope that we can finish on a good note. Any questions, comments? If people can just raise their hands so that they can be recognized. So maybe as people are thinking through, Charles, how can we ensure that the courts are still functional? That's already a question there. And there was a question for Deprose that was commented in the chat box, that how do we balance the rights of our exercising electoral democratic norms in a timely manner versus the advocacy of protecting the citizens from COVID, especially considering some political establishments are already misusing the resources. So we can take those two, Deprose and Charles, and then anyone else that wishes to ask anything or to comment on anything, please feel free to raise your hand so I can recognize you. Deprose a minute, and then Charles a minute too.
Okay, thank you very much, Linga. You know, one of the points I wanted to acknowledge really was it's also been an opportunity in the last couple of months to see which courts we can rely on for leadership in enforcing human rights, and that the Malawi court is proving to be one that is interested in really redefining jurisprudence for the region in the manner in which they approached what was a very difficult matter of rejecting the lockdown regulations from the Minister of Health by raising issues that every court must raise. They spoke to the question of absence of social security and also dealt with the question, including in court citing that 73% of Malawians don't have social protection. And they used the directive principles of state policy, and not just saying we don't have it in the Bill of Rights, but in the national objectives of the Constitution. They used that to advance protection for people. I found that very useful. And I think many people are already writing about jurisprudence emerging out of the Supreme Court in Malawi. The question that Tilda asked is a difficult one. The balance between exercising rights and the limitations that are obviously imposed by the restrictions of COVID-19. And you also raised the question of the second wave. Let me tackle the second wave and probably leave others to deal with the first one. The second wave in South Africa is evident that South Africa has the largest number of cases. I think it was in March, when the South Africa recorded its first 13 cases. Today, we are sitting with around over 800,000 cases in South Africa, and few cases in the surrounding countries. But it's testament to testing, because they have tested 5.6 million people in order to be able to contain this. But the second wave looks to me like across the region, we might repeat the same mistakes. Of course, there won't be hard lockdowns because I think we've learned the lesson. But the challenge I have is that there is nothing that has come out of the lockdown phase one by way of innovation from states that could be deployed in the second wave if it comes. We are going to have to be relying on people and strategies that they adopt at household level, at community level. And one hopes that those household and community level strategies will find expression in national policy, so that for the first time, governments will be talking about policies that actually reflect aspirations and experience of citizens. So the second wave is genuine for most countries in Europe. For South Africa, it's experience, but also in surrounding countries, we're starting to see what had gone down in cases reported coming up. And I just hope that all the things we raised today from everyone on the panel about prioritizing rights become the time to demonstrate that we have learned a lesson. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let's move to Charles right away. You have been engaging in quite a lot of strategic litigation and many other things that have an interface between the citizens and the judiciary. So there's a question: how to ensure that the judicial system remains functional to deal with the immediate things that we are seeing as a result of COVID-19? And the Mphatso particularly pointed out the issues around gender-based violence. Your quick reactions, Charles?
Yeah, thank you so much, Linga and Mphatso, for the question. My take is that I think the judiciary in Malawi has been very progressive. When you look at the recent judgment on the COVID-19, following the litigation by HRDC, among other litigants, in the case of lockdown, the courts did not only hold the executive accountable on its violation of the Constitution, but it went further to make specific recommendations for consideration by government. And one of the recommendations the court made was the social security of the citizens, that any decision taken by government must pay attention to social security. And this is also in view of the constitutional rights. Particularly, the court made the reference to the right to dignity as well as the right to life, validating these fundamental socioeconomic rights that the state cannot just decide to throw them away in the name of COVID-19 or responding to any pandemic. It went further even to touch on issues to do with protection of the most vulnerable families, particularly those that are extremely poor. Looking at some of the social security programs that we are running in Malawi, the school feeding program, it even cited that the fact that the schools were closed, it also meant that these kids from these vulnerable households could not have access to these social services, such as the school feeding programs that were really, central to providing support to the livelihood of these kids. It also touched on government's responsiveness to deal with gender-based violence, also acknowledging that here we had a double crisis, as Deprose had also highlighted. You had the perpetrators of violence within the homes, and they're idling there, and then you have the women who already have a double burden, but again are facing this violence within the homes. So, in short, the judiciary in its ruling, but this judgment points to the government responsibility in taking care of the social securities of the vulnerable, looking at the poor, looking at the children, looking at women, and I thought these were not just mere recommendations, but these are recommendations that were stemming from the constitutional position that had been taken, particularly when you look at the validation of the socioeconomic rights, particularly the right to dignity, as well as the right to life that the court made reference to. Having said that, my other observation is that we may not just rely on the judiciary. I think there are quite a number of stakeholders that we must engage in this process. Apart from holding the executive accountable on its decisions, the question is, how do we begin now to robustly engage the government to ensure that these social securities that are being referred to by the courts are really enforced? And without the citizen engagement to ensure that we hold the executive accountable or governments accountable overall in enforcement of these fundamental rights, we may not really make strides. Also, just to highlight that the question of GBV is not a new question. I think this question has been there. It has only been exacerbated by COVID-19. And my view is that our approach to the fight against GBV should really be comprehensive, and they should be integrated in all other interventions that we have as non-state actors as well as government overall. So I want to agree with Mphatso that this is really a double crisis. We are not only dealing with the COVID here as a public health issue, but most importantly, we're dealing with the socioeconomic issues that have really, attacked the very, central units of our societies, the economy, the politics, and overall the governance itself. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. I don't see any hands, but there is a comment here, and in conclusion, I want to ask Charles, I suppose you've already had your last say on this, but Professor, 1 minute to respond to the question that Dire has raised. Very insightful discussions and lessons about COVID-19 socioeconomic impacts on government and society. What could be the best advocacy measure to build resilience in the region that will avoid recurrence of a copy and paste system of approach in the recovery and in the second wave preparedness? A unified regional regulatory approach for Southern Africa, which would form the standards for implementation in individual countries. Is that possible? So, Professor, your 1 minute in conclusion, and make sure that you touch on the issue that Dire has asked, if it's possible to have a unified regional regulatory approach. And Colette, I'll also be inviting you to make your last statement for a minute before I ask our partner to close this wonderful webinar. So over to you, Prof.
I think that is indeed possible, depending on the extent to which civil society organizations and human rights defenders will agitate towards that. What we see is that COVID-19 has given room for elitist approach, for continued trends of exclusionary governance, and the response has given the instruments for governments to violate rights and importantly to marginalize those are the most in need. So that would require a strong agitation and action from our side, because for what we have now, it would be difficult to see a regional approach to the issue that Deprose has put forward, that of an advocacy for vaccines in our region. So I think that would require a robust action from civil society organizations, from defenders to stand that campaign. Similarly to the campaigns that we have undertaken when it was the time of debt relief. So I think this is the time for defenders to stand, to put pressure on our domestic governments for good governance, but also to come together as a region. So again, civil society leaders to drive that advocacy agenda.
Thank you so much, Professor. We move to Colette, your last statement. A minute, please.
Thank you very much. I concur completely with the previous speaker that our region is being challenged. It seems that we have not even considered how to spread our wings, how to ensure that it is not only, I know that political and civil rights remain like a luxury for some, because member states still continue, to undermine and to violate in a very shocking way. But it's still very, very important to ensure that the social and economic rights, the right to health, it's a fundamental right. And we all know that rights are interdependent and interrelated. So we need to ensure that health is part of our business. And definitely the civil society, the human rights defender within Southern Africa, we can come as a collective, identify, a strategy that can change the current situation. Advocacy, and they've mentioned resilience, and also robust voices from the region, from Southern Africa, standing together, raising the importance of having a program that will apply across board for health, social, providing social services to the vulnerable. In South Africa, during COVID-19, shelters were provided for gender-based violence. However, there was a lack of provision for protection, because people who were in shelters, they didn't have proper spaces where they can comply with the protocol. They need to ensure that they provide protection for people not to contaminate or to contact COVID-19. Same applies to the frontline workers. The frontline workers are women mainly who are playing this important role. So that kind of protection becomes very, very important. And social grant, those that are unemployed, we've got migrants, we've got asylum seekers that were not part of the deal when stimulus were brought forward, that will have such a budget to assist people who do not have jobs, that are unemployed, that are losing jobs, who do not fall within the UIF programs. Those people who are unemployed continue to receive funding, and we have been advocating for extension of that social grant to be provided to people, and where possible to increase, because people, we all need to have bread on table to support, because livelihood is one of the things that COVID-19 has affected. Movement of people in Southern Africa, I think we still need to push for a mechanism that will enable people to move around, without all these restrictions that we have. Like, currently we are speaking about what's going to happen because there's threat that there's going to be, enforcement of repatriation of some sort of Zimbabweans or of people, of foreigners that are in the country. So, we need to come up with policies that sustain, they are not short or, addresses a situation as it comes, they become reactionary. They do not sustain us. We need to come up with some of the sustainable processes that could be used. The last point is the Abuja Declaration, which is an AU mechanism, has called member states to be ready to prepare and to contribute percentages of the GDP. 15% has been highlighted as a contribution that can go towards health. If we were contributing all these years since it was adopted in 2009 or 2008, I'm sure we will not be in a situation where we are, where we have to borrow and we're expecting what you call citizens who are the electorate to continue, backing up, bailing out states, bailing up, and poverty is increasing, and we become very complacent in the situation. I think the school feeding scheme, it's a good idea. The schools were arranged in such a way that children that depend on feeding scheme go to school to collect their lunch packages. I thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Colette. Thank you so much for our wonderful discussants and the keynote address that was done. And thank you so much, especially to you participants, for bearing with us until this time. I think there's a lot, and I'll not attempt to summarize anything, but to just pick one of the key threads that have come from our presenters. I think Deprose has really said, let's not celebrate the low numbers. I think there's quite a lot that we need to be looking at in terms of how COVID-19 has really disrupted the social, economic, and political infrastructure of Southern Africa. And how do we rise up to making sure that we can build back better and build back equitably? Professor raised an important aspect. He actually said, even before COVID, we were already on ground zero. The state was bankrupt in many aspects, not just the economy, but even in terms of the state of democratic governance. So how do we ensure that we can still continue to challenge so that we are actually building back better? Because we are really starting from a very low ebb, considering that even pre-COVID situation, we already had challenges. Charles, my brother, has raised the issue around how can we make sure that the gaps that are very evident in the way that nation states responded to COVID can be actually sealed. How do we use the law? How do we use strategic collaboration with other players for us to be able to look at some of the structural deficits that we are facing in many forms of governance on this continent? Colette has been the voice emphasizing that it's not enough to have the legislation on paper. She summarized the issue that if all countries had actually abided by the Abuja Declaration that looks at 14% allocation of the national budget to health systems, we couldn't have been here. We couldn't have had health workers that are lacking PPEs. We couldn't have had people dying because the hospitals do not have ventilators. How do we make sure that we can translate this beautiful legislation and policies into action? And of course, I want to thank all the participants that put up their questions and challenges on the chat box. Indeed, as we had wanted to do it, Oxfam and its partners wanted to make sure that this is a space for just starting the dialogue, for being able to cut out what is our piece of cake, what is our piece of action as civil society organizations in making sure that we can have recovery, we can have human rights interventions that are supporting the restoration of our economies and our state of governance, given the ravaging that COVID-19 has presented. I wish to now ask our partner, Rashid, Crisis in Zimbabwe, to make a statement of closing this successful webinar held today on the International Human Rights Day. Rashid, over to you, please.
thank you, Linga, for facilitating this process, this platform, and for making sure that we get as many informative views as possible, and for provoking the panelists and ensuring that the discussion comes up with tangible solutions to the challenges that our people face at the lowest level of the community. I would want to thank the keynote speaker, Deprose, for the issues that you raised. I will not stick to repeat what Linga has just done. Also thank Professor Adriano for clearly highlighting the issues from the perspective of Mozambique, and to Colette for bringing out issues around gender and what needs to be done, and for Charles for a very informative discussion and presentation. My takeaway from the conversation that has been taking place are two questions that challenge us as citizens and as leaders in civil society. And one question was raised is, how do we build public trust in government when citizens already do not have that trust, and when that trust was further eroded by COVID? How do we restore the public confidence in democracy in an environment where democratic space has been shrinking and closing, and there's been justification by many governments to close that space? And how do we take back the power that has been usurped by the state during this time? How do we take that back? How do we make sure that the interventions that come are not elitist, but they seek to provide solutions to the challenges that are affected by the poor and most affected by COVID? How do we make sure that the recovery process, if there is a recovery process, which we should own, is effective in all the countries that are in SADC? But also the other question that is raised is, what advocacy strategies do we need to put in place at a regional level to make sure that the recovery and the restoration of human rights in Southern Africa is more effective? So I take this as a challenge to all civil society, players here and the panelists, and to thank the panelists and thank our co-host Oxfam. We as the Crisis Water Coalition are happy to be working with you and all the panelists. We hope and look forward to further engagement and ensuring that we have put these conversations not only taking place virtually, but taking place in the communities that we work in. Thank you very much, all of you.
Thank you so much, Rashid. And on that note, I wish to thank you all for staying on up until now. And please enjoy the Human Rights Day and enjoy your lunch and afternoon. If we do not cross paths, and if you believe in Christmas, Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Stay on, Aluta continua. Bye-bye.
Oh, thank you to you, Ms. Moderator, for really doing stunning work. Thank you, colleagues. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.